Checks and balances. It is one of the most basic aspects of our federal government, and one that even people who don't know much about government seem to know about, as an essential element to making our government work and making sure our presidents don't overstep or expand their power too far. But it doesn't always work the way we were taught in civics class. Take, for example, executive orders. Those are presidential rules explaining how laws will be applied and enforced, a process that somewhat circumvents Congress and, for the most part, has the power and weight of law. Candidate Trump hammered President Obama for his use of executive orders, and Trump as president has relied on them as well. In fact, in his first year, Trump relied on executive orders 58 times, far more than Obama's annual average. Turns out there are patterns when it comes to executive orders. Presidents Reagan through Obama used them in similar amounts. Surprisingly, Jimmy Carter averaged 80 EOs a year. And going back a few generations further, Presidents Truman, Roosevelt, and Hoover used them a whole lot more than presidents do today. Another key to the checks and balances system is congressional oversight of presidents. Hearings, reports, votes, and every now and then something more. The best known example, of course, is the impeachment process. We've seen it twice in the past 45 years, with President Nixon and Bill Clinton in the White House. But short of impeachment are more standard oversight processes. They're only as effective as Congress makes them. Take the Russia probes, for example. There are 3 different congressional committees examining Trump and Russia right now, but 2 of them have essentially descended into partisan infighting. The only effective one, from the Senate Intelligence Committee, does most of its work in secret. And another, the House Oversight Committee, appears to be more aimed at assisting President Trump than providing actual oversight, though that trend may be changing, with the Republican-led House Oversight Committee now looking into the Rob Porter mess. But this is not going to comfort a whole lot of Democrats who look back at Congress's Benghazi probes with contempt. 28 months of hearings, almost $8 million spent with no evidence of wrongdoing, no additional actions taken, while to many Democrats the focus of Republicans at Benghazi was aimed at making Hillary Clinton look bad rather than finding the truth of what actually happened in Benghazi. And Dwayne, let me start with you on this. Have we seen, when we have presidents and parties who run Congress of the same party, have we had examples in the past of Congress failing to fulfill its oversight responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, we can go back, and David and I can certainly cite positive examples of congressional oversight. Harry Truman's investigating committee during World War II, which did a wonderful job of finding various waste and inefficiency. But we also can easily point to instances where oversight has been used for partisan purposes. During the Watergate period that we've mentioned a couple of times, certainly the congressional hearings, the Senate investigating committee headed by Sam Ervin was essential. But we always think of Watergate as an example where the checks and balances worked. But they worked in that instance only because of the White House tapes. Up until the tapes were discovered, and they were discovered by the Senate investigating committee, so the committee deserves credit for that. Up until then, it was going to be John Dean's word versus Richard Nixon's word, and that was not going to be enough to approve an impeachment resolution or convict the president. So Watergate shows the system can work, but it worked in that instance almost through a quirk, an oddity. Trump did make some kind of comment at the time he was firing FBI Director Comey that implied there might be White House tapes, but we certainly haven't heard or seen anything further on that, and chances are that there probably are no tapes.
And it's worth noting, looking back on Watergate, and I was surprised when I discovered this. When the impeachment vote was taken on the House Judiciary Committee, the majority of Republicans voted no on impeachment. There were enough to get it out of committee.
Yeah, there were 5 or 6 Republicans that did vote for it, so enough that it couldn't be dismissed as simply partisan.
See, I think that's the key, because when it comes to both executive orders and this whole notion of checks and balances, I think the context that we have to place all this in is the dysfunctionality of Congress. What you have seen is a separating out of the 2 parties. We can both remember a time when there were lots of liberal Republicans and lots of conservative Democrats. I mean, Franklin Roosevelt, his worst enemies were conservative Democrats. They hated the New Deal. They hated Roosevelt. They joined with conservative Republicans eventually to shut down the New Deal. So, but that's a critical point, because what that means is when you are debating something in Congress, you're debating it over the merits of the idea. You're not debating it over, oh, that's a Republican proposal, therefore I can't support it. So it makes it very difficult to have proper oversight when it's a zero-sum game. In other words, I can't support anything the Democrats support or vice versa.
You mentioned the ideological purity almost of both parties. The Democratic Party is now just almost entirely liberal and progressive, Republicans conservative. Is Washington now more tribal than
Yes.
it was in the past? And is that a factor here? What about the perpetual election cycle, which seems like is a more modern creation? Is that also leading to these stark divisions?
Yeah, the Citizens United case. I mean, you can talk to any congressman, Republican or Democrat, especially the congressman. They will tell you that they hate the fact that they have to spend every evening on the telephone trying to raise money. I think we are in an environment where this dysfunctionality, in a way we're focusing over and over and again on the president, but there needs to be a lot of attention paid to Congress. Congress is not working, and much of the problem that we're experiencing today, and whatever legislation you want to focus on, has to do with that fact.
And that really puts more pressure on the courts. Congress's inability to exercise its oversight function effectively for partisanship and reasons of partisanship really leaves it up to the courts, and part of the problem is we've seen the courts becoming more and more partisan in recent years.
Yeah.
One can almost predict how 8 of the 9 justices are going to vote on most issues based on which president appointed them.
Yeah. Immigration.
Trump's criticism of the Ninth Circuit in California, that one judge there can make national policy. Part of Trump's attack, it's not just the media and the press, it's the legitimacy of the courts, it's the legitimacy of the Justice Department. It's similar to Nixon and Watergate because Trump is attacking any other possible source of power or any competing source of power or influence within and outside the government.
Very, very quickly, just about time for only yes or no. Are you confident, are you optimistic that we will right ourselves and get out of this, or do you think we're in for more of the same? I'll start with you.
I think in the short run, we're in for more of the same. What might make a difference would be the congressional elections in 2018.
Quickly?
I would agree. I hope that we're going to learn our lessons from the past. We have in the past. We have righted ourselves, and I think it's very important that we do so again.
David, Dwayne, thank you very much. Happy President's Day. Thank you for joining us. We'll take a break. When we come back, we've already spoken a lot about President Trump. A new book by more than a dozen mental health professionals digs even deeper. They say he's mentally unfit for office, and we recently spoke with one of them.